a new report from cybersecurity firm CrowdStrike reveals China posed the largest cyber threat over the last 6 months. The company's Overwatch report reveals Chinese adversaries have made targeted and persistent intrusion attempts at multiple sectors of the economy, from biotech and defense to pharma and transportation. I spoke to CrowdStrike Chief Technology Officer Dmitri Alperovitch and asked him about both pressing matters.
The big headline from the report really is that China is back. When you look at the last couple of years, we actually saw a precipitous decline in Chinese nation-state-sponsored intrusion activity against the commercial sector in 2016, right after the Obama administration struck that agreement with President Xi that both countries would stop conducting industrial espionage against each other. And the Chinese largely abided by that agreement for the time. But then in the last year and a half, we started to see pickup in activity. And now we're just seeing a lot of intrusions in all sectors of the economy, whether it's biotech, pharmaceuticals, high tech, professional services, hospitality, insurance, mining, all types of sectors where the Chinese are breaking in and stealing intellectual property. And now, as opposed to before, it's mostly the Ministry of State Security, their civilian intelligence arm, that's doing most of this activity, versus the People's Liberation Army, the military that was doing a lot of that activity before 2015.
Now, Bloomberg has published an extensive investigation that found that the Chinese implanted spy chips on the motherboards of Supermicro servers that then ended up at some 30 U.S. companies and the U.K. and U.S. governments. What's your reaction to this report? We've also got a new story out today that a similar situation was found at a U.S. telecom.
Well, supply chain has always been a concern, and we're actually seeing China and Russia and others leveraging the software supply chain in their attacks, where they're compromising software and leveraging the updates for that software to actually introduce malicious code into environments. We haven't personally seen any hardware-based attacks like the ones that those stories are talking about. The interesting thing about hardware, of course, is physical. Someone can actually physically look at it and verify whether there's an implant on those systems or not. So I think there's a lot more to learn still as those stories are unfolding.
Now, I should mention that the companies involved have denied this. UK and US government officials have said there's no reason to doubt the denials. But that said, is this within the scope of something that the Chinese are capable of?
It's certainly possible. This seems like a very expensive and very difficult effort to go through to achieve that objective, knowing, of course, that they're able to do this through the compromise of software supply chains or just direct intrusions into companies like what we're seeing now. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities, but I think there's still a lot of questions to be answered here.
So based on your reporting, what are you most concerned about? You talk about the relationship between nation states, government arms, and their criminal counterparts within those nation states, and that you're continuing to see a blurring of these lines.
That's right. We're seeing increasingly criminal groups adopting nation-state techniques, nation-state tools, and tradecraft in order to break into organizations. So increasingly, as nation-states are coming up with a lot of the innovation, a lot of the new exploits and discovering new vulnerabilities, very, very quickly that dissipates into the criminal underground, and those criminals are now using those techniques to break into companies. The biggest threat to companies, of course, is destructive attacks like the WannaCry attacks and NotPetya attacks we had seen from North Korea and Russia, respectively, in the last year. And those types of attacks can take down organizations for weeks at a time. We worked on a number of cases around those attacks last year, and companies have suffered literally tens of millions of dollars, some hundreds of millions of dollars in damage because of them.
We've got a midterm election coming up here in the United States. How concerned are you about the security and the integrity of those elections?
Well, in general, election systems remain quite vulnerable. Candidates in particular are still not focusing as much as they should be on their security and the security of their campaigns. It's a very difficult problem given the distributed nature of these campaigns and oftentimes that they have volunteers working off personal devices. However, we're not yet seeing any major interference efforts in this election cycle, in the midterms, but it's always a concern. So
what's the defense? I mean, what's the best defense at this point?
Well, it's interesting because the U.S. government, the White House, has come out with their cyber strategy in the last couple of weeks that outlines the fact that deterrence needs to be a big focus going forward. Deterring nation states like Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea from conducting these activities in the first place, that we can't just focus on defense alone. We actually need to find pressure points against those nation states, which don't necessarily have to be cyber. They can be economic, they can be diplomatic, leveraging really the full toolkit of the U.S. power along with our allies to pressure those nation states to stop orchestrating these attacks against us.
You also document increased targeting of the biotech industry. You know, how successful have those attacks been, and what are the consequences?
Well, this has been a big focus for China in the last year and a half. We're seeing a lot of intrusions into various biotech startups and more established companies. And this is all part of the Chinese Made in China 2025 plan that they are working towards, where they want to see China being a major competitor on the global stage in this sector as well as other sectors. They want to see domestic industry thrive in those sectors. And they're doing that in part by stealing our intellectual property in order to shortcut that time for R&D, understand what mistakes not to make and where to place their bets.
You know, it's clear that China has these ambitions. It's clear that China is a threat, as you've so well detailed. I mean, do you think the response from U.S. companies and U.S. and U.K. governments should be to move the supply chain, or to, you know, sort of divert some of these products that are being made in China to other countries?
Well, there's no question that if you're operating in China, if you're manufacturing things in China, if you're developing in China, you absolutely have to worry about the compromise of your supply chain. You have to worry about intrusions from Chinese competitors and sometimes even Chinese partners into your networks that are stealing your intellectual property. And there needs to be done more to confront China and the Chinese government on these issues. The Trump administration has started towards that with the report that the U.S. Trade Administration released earlier this spring, outlining in almost 300 pages all the things that the Chinese are doing to steal intellectual property, and that's something that needs to be a continued focus going forward. We cannot allow them to take our intellectual property, really the richness of this country that drives our innovation, and steal that wholesale.
In terms of funding their efforts, how successful have hackers been in terms of targeting cryptocurrency and stealing money, essentially?
That has been another big focus for a number of different criminal groups, but also North Korea. North Korea has used hacking not just to achieve their geopolitical objectives, but also to steal funds to fund their regimes. They've broken into banks, like famously the Bank of Bangladesh, but also cryptocurrency exchanges, and have stolen literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of bitcoins and other cryptocurrencies that they've tried to then monetize. So that continues to be a focus for them. It continues to be a focus for criminal groups as well. Typically, when you look at these new startups in the cryptocurrency markets, they don't have a lot of security. They're typically very small, and it's not that hard to break in, steal all the tokens. And of course, the unfortunate thing is that there is no central authority that can give you your money back once that happens.